course, please share your slide, and we'd love to hear about neuromodulation.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you. I'm going to share my screen if I can. And start the slideshow. All right, can everyone see that?
It is not in the presenter mode.
Okay, let me switch that. How about
I
now?
tell you what, Najafi is such a perfectionist. I say, James, just go for it, man.
It's amazing. No, great. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is James Cavuoto. I'm the editor and publisher at Neurotech Reports. We're a publishing and market intelligence firm in the neuromodulation space, launched in 2001. So we've been around for more than 20 years. A couple of years ago, we launched a new publication in the emerging field of bioelectronic medicine. So I want to talk today a little bit about not just the neuromodulation industry, but bioelectronic medicine in general, what the differences are, and the commonality between the two. So what's included in bioelectronic medicine? Well, there's really segments in organ stim, in pain stim, and neuroprosthetics, and in other applications. So this is data from our recent market report on the bioelectronic medicine industry, and just really to hone in on the differences between traditional neuromodulation, which is really electrical stimulation that affects the nervous system, the CNS, the brain, the peripheral nervous system, pain, of course, being right now one of the largest application areas. But when we look at bioelectronic medicine, we're broadening the outlook. So there's various definitions out there for bioelectronic medicine, including definitions from the NIH, DARPA, the Pentagon's research unit has a slightly different definition, and there's varying definitions out there. But basically, bioelectronic medicine includes the entire panoply of using electrical stimulation to treat and diagnose disorders, whether they're neurological or not. So again, we're honing in on organ stimulation, which would include applications in bowel and bladder disorders, incontinence, for instance, applications in inflammation, applications in cardiovascular applications. And then, of course, when you add in the more traditional neuromodulation applications, particularly in pain and in movement disorders. And then you add in neuroprosthetics applications where you're using stimulation to restore a lost functions, such as a cochlear implant or a retinal implant or new devices that are restoring movement in paralyzed individuals. What you see is a really broad and emerging market for bioelectronic medicine. And so, as you can see, this is a market we see approaching $20 billion within a few years. Again, this is data from our market research report, the market for bioelectronic medicine. So just a quick, comparison of why we at Neurotech Reports have chosen to publish independent newsletters for the neuromodulation industry and for the bioelectronic medicine industry. We also have two different conferences. We produced the Neurotech Leaders Forum in San Francisco in the fall. Our dates are going to be November 7th and 8th. We'd love to see you in San Francisco. And in the spring, we produced the Bioelectronic Medicine Forum in New York City. And that's generally in April. So how we see the differences between traditional neuromodulation and bioelectronic medicine. Part of it has to do with the targets. Where are we stimulating? Again, in traditional neuromodulation, it's the CNS and the peripheral nervous system. and you're looking at neurological indications like pain, like movement disorders, like epilepsy. In other words, the target is the nervous system itself. Whereas in bioelectronic medicine, the targets could include much more than the nervous system, any end organ, liver, lungs, bowel and bladder, heart, etc. And a much wider range of indications: heart failure, OAB, inflammation, hypertension, etc. So a slight difference in personnel between traditional neuromodulation, where you know, a field dominated by neural engineers, at least in terms of, you know, the research side. On the clinical side, neurosurgeons and neurologists and PM&R clinicians are involved in either implanting the devices, if they're implantables, or prescribing the devices if they're wearables or non-invasive devices. And in bioelectronic medicine, yes, neural engineers are also involved, but you're also reaching out to new disciplines, cardiologists and internists and urologists. And also within bioelectronic medicine, there's more participation and hopefully more investment from the biopharma industry. So large pharma companies like GSK, like Merck, have either invested in or set up separate divisions or joint ventures in bioelectronic medicine. So we expect that trend to continue, which is one of the reasons why we've launched the new publication, Bioelectrics Business Report. So that's a quick rundown on what we see as the difference or what's separating neuromodulation from bioelectronic medicine. This is an example of one of the application areas in bioelectronic medicine where there's competition. Medtronic, of course, was the market leader in many of these fields, but Axonics Modulation, a Southern California company that spun off from the Alfred Mann Foundation, is giving them you know, quite a bit of competition, and will gain even more market share, we expect in the years ahead. And there's some other players. So that's a quick rundown of how we see the neuromodulation and bioelectronic medicine industries. A quick word about us. As I said, we publish both the Neurotech Business Report and the Bioelectrics Business Report newsletters. These are 2 monthly newsletters. You can find more information on our website, Neurotech Reports. We also produce a database of neuromodulation products, some market research reports and white papers on the field, the 2 conferences that I mentioned, and we also perform some consulting for vendors in the industry. Quick rundown on our staff. We have, in addition to myself, a handful of players. Jeremy, I'm pleased to report, is one of our consulting editors and contributes to our publication. So that's a quick overview of Neurotech Reports and the industry. I'm happy to take any questions that y'all have.
Thank you so much, James. So maybe we can also follow with Jeremy, and at the end, actually, we will start with the questions. So Jeremy, the platform is yours. So Jeremy, I cannot hear you. I was wondering that whether your microphone is mute. I don't know, it's only me or?
Maybe Janet can help him, because there were 2 of her.
Thank you, David. I know it's on Zoom. I cannot do anything, so.
So Jeremy, it seems that I saw that you have video but not microphone. I don't know that whether you are joining via phone or. We can see your slides, of course, not in presenting mode, but not your voice. In meantime, to have Jeremy and to having her voice, maybe we can start asking a couple of questions to James. James is amazing overview. Actually, I was always confused with the term of neuromodulation and electrical stimulation. Also, what distinguishing between these two, whether this is marketing names or it's more. But my question here is that at least in the area of the wound and wound healing, there is also another rising application of electrical stimulation for improving the perfusion, accelerating the wound healing, as well as there is the theory of macro stimulation that it's lead to improving oxygen saturation in the muscles. And recently also for management of muscle atrophy, particularly in the patient who are bedbound in the ICU, as well as for example, for long COVID patient. I was wondering that this kind of the category of electrical stimulation, do you see a difference between neuromodulation, or whether neuromodulation can be, by changing some of the waveform, can be used for other applications like wound healing as well as addressing muscle atrophy?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are two really good examples of emerging applications. We tend to lump into bioelectronic medicine applications. In fact, there was a recent deal done between a Texas company called Spark Biomedical and the Feinstein Institutes in New York, where they spun off a company called 5L, 5 liters, for dealing with blood loss. So they're using a form of bioelectronic medicine stimulation to treat that indication, but also there are other companies pursuing the market for neuromodulation for wound healing and quite a few other applications like that. We're just really at the cusp, just beginning to understand some of the basic mechanisms of actions, not just for neurological indications, but for how how stimulation of a nerve which affects an end organ, and it really opens the door, as you mentioned, for different waveforms, for different stimulation paradigms. And you're seeing a lot of activity here in IP, where startups and research institutions are patenting particular types of stimulation, waveforms, targets, much the way the biotech industry, is looking to novel molecules, small molecules, or what have you. In bioelectronic medicine, it's the stimulation paradigm where a lot of the IP activity is taking place, and we expect a lot of exciting new startups to emerge.
And Bijan, you'll see there's already a question, a couple of them, but one of them from Zara in the chat.
Yes, exactly. So I was wondering that whether Jeremy, I saw that you have your microphone, whether we would like to hear from Jeremy and combining two other questions together, because I'm guessing that would be a nicely complementary. So Jeremy, do you have your microphone?
Can you
yes,
hear me?
Hear you. Awesome. Yes. And also we can see.
Yeah, we can hear
well.
you. I'll just tell you right now, we can hear you better than Janet, and we can hear Janet.
Yeah, I think I was unmuted. I was muted, then became unmuted, but switched over to here. So, and can you see my screen? Let me just get it in presentation mode.
Yes, awesome. Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present Trillin Medical. As you mentioned, Bijan, this is licensed technology from UCLA, and it's the area of non-invasive neuromodulation. And the initial indication we're going after is for headache disorders, specifically migraine, and I'll mention that in a little bit. But as you mentioned, my experience is in neuromodulation for most of my career, although I had a slight digression over to MiniMed 20 plus years ago, where I had the pleasure of first getting to know David Armstrong, and then reconnected not too long ago, because we live in the same town in Los Angeles, and so that's been a wonderful reconnection. I think everyone knows the extent of migraine in terms of how large it is, and even with all the drugs that are out there, including new CRGPs, still a huge issue that needs to be addressed in a better way, particularly for folks that don't really want to take on drugs for the rest of their lives. But here are just some of the numbers. that kind of demonstrate the size of the matter. And it's not just the pain component, and I think as most of us know, on this call in particular, but vertigo is a huge issue. It affects about 40% of those with migraine. And there's a lot of folks that just can't take drugs, including the 20% of the 5+ million women who are pregnant per year, or parents don't want their kids dependent, or some of the side effects that people can't tolerate. So there's a lot of issues with the drugs today. And what is exciting is that there are a number of devices that are out there, and they're all based on electrical stimulation, which is, Jim didn't go into the various forms of neuromodulation, but certainly electrical stimulation is by far the most dominant. But there's other forms, including transmagnetic stimulation, ultrasound stimulation, thermal neuromodulation, and even optical neuromodulation. And each of these have their benefits and certainly their cons. But what's interesting about the technology that I licensed from UCLA is that it uses a completely new approach to neuromodulation, which is vibratory neuromodulation. And I know that vibratory stimulation has been used in certain areas, including for in the area of diabetic foot, I believe, David. But here we're activating the sensory nerves. And it doesn't activate the motor nerves, interesting enough, like electrical stimulation, and we're using it within the external air canal. So in the area of non-invasive neuromodulation, the two kind of hot areas are around the wrist. So you have companies like Cavuoto going after movement disorders, and then you have auricular stimulation, where there are a number of companies. Jim had mentioned Spark Therapeutics going after opioid reduction, and other companies as well. So those are kind of the two big areas. And if you look at the results, it's a clinical stage device. And when I licensed it, there was both a device, which I can show right here. So it's essentially a box with a cable, and then it has vibratory elements at the end, and you would wear it. And the kind of the secret sauce, which I don't talk about much right now, is what goes inside the ear that this is coupled to. So the device has been used in about 70 patients, mainly in headache disorders and predominantly within headache migraine. And for those who are familiar with the pain scale of a VAS scale, you can see that in a large number of patients, there's been a profound decrease. And the device is only used for 20 minutes during an acute attack, but could be used prophylactically as well to prevent migraine, again, 20 minutes per day. So here are about, I don't know how many patients are there, but you can see that there's pain relief experience about 84% of the patients, and about a third of them, they have experienced about a 75% reduction in pain or more. And if these numbers hold out during more rigorous studies over time, compared to the other devices, it's about a 25% improvement to the other devices. The other graph is just one example of multiple episodes of migraine on an individual at different time points, where you can see using the device, a profound decrease in the pain scores. And why within the external air canal, which would be very difficult to use with electrical stimulation for obvious reasons, where just the comfort level would be it just would be very uncomfortable. But the mechanism of action is very similar to electrical stimulation, where you're activating the sensory receptors and masking the pain perception. And within the external air canal, you have a multitude of cranial nerves that are converging. You have the vagus nerve, which we know is through various companies, and whether it's to reduce inflammatory, whether it's headache, certainly an effective site. But there's also other nerves within there that have some interesting effects when stimulated, including the vestibular cochlear nerve, which is known to reduce dizziness or even tinnitus. I think I can skip over that. The migraine market today is, in drugs alone, is about a $4 billion. And our early targets, which the other companies are targeting right now, vagal nerve stimulation is actually covered for all of the 18 million veterans, and there's a huge prevalence of headache within that population, and also within the teens and also pregnant women. So these are really the targets that the company is going after now, mainly because reimbursement, which is growing, isn't quite there yet in a widespread scale. And so, these are the kind of the obvious targets. So you do have a number of companies that are on the market today, such as electroCore, and they're really the pioneers of this field, and have done a tremendous amount for non-invasive neuromodulation as a whole. And they have a multiple indications within headache and also outside of headache, and including long COVID. And the model, which is interesting, that Jim kind of alluded to a little bit in one of his slides, he used the word dosing. So there is an upfront cost to all of these, and reimbursement really is following this path as well, followed by a monthly, whether it's you're refilling like a prescription, or you're throwing away the device and buying a new one. But there is an ongoing cost. So we are later into the market, but that was always Al Mann's philosophy, where come out with a better mousetrap and let the others increase awareness, and particularly pave the way for reimbursement. So hopefully that'll work for this company as well. So as I mentioned, there is emerging reimbursement. There is just recently established a HCPCS code for non-invasive neuromodulation. Some VNS is reimbursed, for instance, for CVS and Caremark, and on a monthly basis. And interesting, NHS England covers VNS for treatment of refractory cluster headache, which is a much smaller population, but it's the worst form of headache that's out there. Incredibly debilitating. So from UCLA, we licensed one patent, the main patent, but there's also several patents that are pending at UCLA that we have the rights to. Separately, we actually filed a provisional patent to increase the strength of the portfolio, and developing additional IP as well. Based on a former branch chief of neurology over at FDA, we're pretty confident that this should be a de novo pathway, although by the time we get to market, and we'll call it 3 years or so from where we are today, there is several other companies working on vibratory stimulation. So there's a possibility that we might be able to use one of those devices as a predicate device. This is more kind of on a marketing side, but I think I'll skip over this one in the interest of time so we can have a further discussion. But where we are today is that we have a fully functional device that's at a clinical stage that we obtained from UCLA. The device has been tested on about 70 patients on headache. This is at UCLA through an IRB designated as a non-significant risk. They're actually undergoing a study with the device for obstructive sleep apnea as well. And so we're closely following that to see how that progresses, because we also have the rights to all sleep disordered breathing. So September of last year, we entered into the license agreement with UCLA. It was a painful and drawn out process, in part because of COVID, but I think I've become an expert at license agreements for the universities. So if anyone needs guidance there, certainly have learned a lot there. We've developed our first indication is going after acute migraine, just because it's a quick and easy study to do to really see how this compares to other devices and drugs. We've aligned ourselves with Dr. Steven Silverstein. Several of you may know that name. He's an icon within the field of headache disorders over at Thomas Jefferson University. Interesting enough, he's as we speak writing guidelines for the community and for payers for non-invasive neuromodulation. So he's touched every device and drug there is, and so we'll have a good certainly benchmark to see how our device stacks up to the others. We've secured a contract manufacturer to produce devices for the upcoming clinical device. And when I came across this technology, having been involved with Neurotech Reports and seeing all the various forms of neuromodulation, I got so excited. I never heard of a vibratory stimulation as a modality. And so, that's really the reason why I wanted to take this IP and bring it to market. And, I'm certainly convinced that there is something there, and put in or committed about $150,000 in my own funding. So where we are today to where we need to get to, the next milestone is really getting through this upcoming pilot study to validate the UCLA results with Dr. Steven Silverstein. And then at that point, raise an additional round to get through FDA. So we're estimating about 3 years. If you look at how much does it take to get to market, compared to an implantable neuromodulation device, which typically takes $100 million to get to FDA. For a non-invasive device from inception, you're looking at about, I've seen it as low as $15 million to get through, commercialization. And so, I think we can skip over this. All these devices have a lot of potential, particularly when reimbursement comes into play. Do want to touch upon other indications. All of these neuromodulation devices are, can be considered platform technologies, and other potential indications for this device, tinnitus, which is really well underserved by drugs, and there are a few devices coming out there, but we believe that this approach could serve the tinnitus sufferers really well, and obstructive sleep apnea, where there is, as I mentioned, an ongoing UCLA sponsored study. If you look at the landscape in terms of valuations, the first ones are non-invasive devices. Telehealth is probably the darling of the community right now, where they have a $500 million valuation, and their last raise was $77 million going after essential tremor. electroCore, as I mentioned, was the pioneer. They've raised a staggering $200 million over quite a few years. And at one point was worth $500 million based on the excitement of reimbursement, but the reimbursement pathway always takes longer than people hope for. And so, they're trading, they're on the NASDAQ, but trading, at 10% of that today. Tivic Health is one of the latest in the market, going after sinusitis. And this is the one that I mentioned, got to market with, only $15 million, and then raised quite a bit of money on the IPO on NASDAQ. And very exciting product, and then a few others. But it's really the implantable devices. If you look at valuations, Jim had referenced Exonics, which came out of the Owlman Foundation today, probably has a $3 billion market cap. Inspire, haven't looked at them today, but was at $6 billion, and they're going after obstructive sleep apnea through hypoglossal stimulation. So it is a very exciting landscape. Back to Trillin, where the team that we have are all seasoned neuromodulation individuals, from former CFOs of Advanced Bionics to the lead developer over at Bioness. These are companies that I both worked for. Amy Goodman, who came from the implantable world for headache with a company called ATI, and then Mark Linden, who's one of my closest friends for many years, was Owlman's personal and business lawyer and former chairman of the board of Bioness, a neuromodulation company. And then some of the folks that we have around here on clinical advisors are kind of the who's who, among the who's who of neuromodulation, from Steven Silverstein, who I mentioned, Jans Elrich, who was one of the early pioneers of auricular electrical stimulation, Tim Deer, who is probably the biggest name in neuromodulation for pain today, and probably put in about 10,000 spinal cord stimulation. And then various other business advisors, including 2 former CEOs of neuromodulation companies, and most recently, Ariane Tom from Stanford, neuroengineer, who has a VC background. So, to get to where we need to get through this initial clinical trial and beyond, we're looking to raise up to about $1.2 million. So we're just starting to reach out to raise some money. So happy to have discussions if anyone's interested in learning more about the investment opportunity. So really, just in sum, where I took this on because I'm passionate about neuromodulation and particularly about vibratory stimulation, which is just an emerging sector within the field of neuromodulation. And we have some good IP from UCLA, promising early results, and with acute migraine being just the first of several indications, but looking at some others down the road as well. So wanted to leave you with just a few patient testimonials from patients over at UCLA, where certainly it's changed the lives of already quite a few patients, and hopefully we can do that to a larger degree once it's commercial. So happy to take any questions around this, and questions for Jim as well. So thank you again for letting me present to the device.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jeremy and James. Amazing talk. So I'm seeing that there are many questions or coming to the chat box. So I have more questions. I start to asking question to you. So one problem that Jeremy's often we have for electrical stimulation as well as mechanical stimulation is what's the compliance of the patient, whether they're on demand they can use them. The nice thing with the pill is that when we feel headache, we can take them. But often for the devices, we leave it at home and then we start to having headache or we have pain. Using those devices, carrying of those devices often sometimes is not very practical. So how do you see to address those kind of the challenges? Do you see that the system becomes something that become fully wearable, that during a day when patient need to use it, they can activate them, or not? You use it only for home use for a short period of the time application?
Well, this is designed as a home use device, and numbers of the companies are integrating a telemedicine component to it. Almost all of them are, with the exception of one or two, are prescription devices. So it's designed as an at-home device, wearable. And I kind of went over it quickly, but for an acute migraine attack where you would wear it for 20 minutes at the onset, although there is some anecdotal data in terms of using it prophylactically on a daily basis, again for about 20 minutes. But all of this needs to be researched more for this device. And I see some of the questions in terms of sham, which is always an interesting challenge with neuromodulation devices, which I know Jim has a lot of opinions on that. So Jim, if you want to question, but so Jim, do you want to mention how do you design a sham control study around neuromodulation?
Well, it's been an issue over the years, particularly for implanted device vendors, and fortunately, the FDA has kind of I won't say loosened, but changed some of their policies over the years vis-a-vis sham stimulation. One of the problems in setting up a clinical trial where you're trying to compare the efficacy of the active stimulation paradigm versus the control group that's getting sham stimulation is, well, how do you know that the sham group isn't getting some benefit from that quote unquote sham stimulation? And in fact, that was the cause of a number of, or at least a major factor in a number of high profile clinical trials. One of the most prominent was a company called North Star Neuroscience, which had a device for treating stroke. Very good data in their preliminary open label trials, getting good results from electrical stimulation of the motor cortex post-stroke. Unfortunately, in their clinical trial, they didn't really get enough separation between the sham stimulation and the active stimulation. And so even though they got great results in the pivotal trial from the active group, they also got good results from the sham group. And so as a result, that was a failure. So that's been an issue. There's also ethical issues involved in sham stimulation. And one of the main factors we've seen with neuromodulation therapies is that, in general, this is a therapeutic approach that does better over time. We've seen this time and time again, not just for pain, but in psychiatric disorders, where the 6-month data looks better than the 3-month data, the 12-month data looks better than the 6-month data, the 18-month data, the 24-month data, but you run into an ethical problem. Is it ethical to keep someone on a sham stimulation for 24 months? So you can't really, whereas in a drug trial where you give someone a sugar pill, and in pharmaceutical trials, you don't expect to go out 24 months. You expect to see results in many cases in 3 months. So that's been an issue. It gets difficult, and there are many in our field who believe that sham stimulation really shouldn't be necessary. If you want to do a randomized controlled trial, fine, but your endpoints, and in fact, we've seen this with a lot of studies where you design a non-inferiority trial, where you're not so much comparing the stimulation therapy versus sham stimulation. You're comparing the stimulation versus conventional medical management. And I happen to believe that that's a much better approach and avoids a lot of the problems, and also really opens the door in your labeling to a wider patient population. And why shouldn't the clinician and the patient have access to these new neuromodulation and bioelectronic medicine therapies, whether they're refractory to drugs or not? So anyway, that's just my.
Thank you so much, James. This is great. Of course, I'm serving in a panel, a device panel. I cannot disclose much details, but the idea is to select the devices that can address long COVID. And it's amazing to see the discussion. I do agree with you, but in the panel, we shot down some of the devices because the panel, some of the members of the panel who has a strong voice, they believe that it's very hard to design even blinded, double-blinded study. And they said that is a problem for FDA. But I'm guessing, Dr. Gozani, you are a leader in neuromodulation field with neurometrics. It's many years that you're working in this area. What do you think in this field? And I know that you went to FDA, and I'm guessing you know some of those challenges for the designing of the sham versus active.
Well, I agree with everything that James said. And James, good to see you again. It's been a while. Our recent experience with fibromyalgia, we got a de novo clearance for with our Quell device. The FDA insisted on a sham control trial. So there are still a lot of people at FDA that in the neurology division that that's their mindset, and I think it's going to be difficult to get them off that surprisingly for the non-invasive devices, because a lot of the invasive devices have actually not done sham control trials. They were against other sorts of controls. But our experience thus far has been that and pretty much all the migraine devices, I believe, electrocores, Theranica, and so forth, have all done sham control trials of some sort or another. So it's just a challenge we have to overcome.
I echo you again. That's experience that I have this panel, that there are a couple of people on the panel that they decide about future of those devices, and this is their mindset. They want to see that kind of control. So let's go to the questions to the chat box. Of course, Dr. Klonov, the editor-in-chief of Journal of Diabetes Science and Technology, asked about Neurotech, that whether Neurotech journals is in PubMed as a peer-reviewed journal, so like a Harvard Business journal that is informing the industries.
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. We are not a scientific publication. We label ourselves as an industry publication. So our job is really to report on what's happening in industry, what are the collaborations that are going on, who's getting funding, what are some of the interesting technical trends, what are some of the interesting marketing trends, where are the competitive battlegrounds, and who has a leg up, et cetera. So those are the types of things we'd like to cover in our publication. We do not seek to play the role of a scientific publication. So no, we're not in PubMed. However, there have been an increasing number of new publications, scientific journals that we do read and track. that are gaining prominence. The journal Neuromodulation Technology at the Neural Interface is an example of a newer journal that's gaining prominence in the field.
Right, but I'm guessing in any way, I'm guessing with Society of Diabetes Science and Technology, with your actual journal might have some synergy and collaboration, because now there, as you earlier mentioned, the use of neuromodulation in patients with diabetes for management of painful neuropathy to even management of numbness in mechanical stimulation. Actually, we did a study that using smart shoes with mechanical stimulation can significantly improve balance and gait on people who has numbness in the feet. So there are a great overlapping in this area. So Dr. Kulonov, do you would like to add us?
Yes, so at Diabetes Technology Society, I think we're doing something similar for diabetes technology as what you, Jim, are doing for neurotech and bioelectric medicine. And we've recently gotten interested in spinal cord stimulation for painful diabetic neuropathy, which is a really common problem. So after this meeting, I intend to reach out to you and see what you're doing with spinal cord stimulation.
It's great. So again, this is C2SHiP is about really connecting people together, and we are hoping to have those as members of the C2SHiP as well. So Dr. Saberi asked that, does Neurotech publication address the gaps in the field as well? So I don't know, Dr. Saberi, do you want to elaborate on your question?
Hello, everyone. Yes, for sure. Thank you for giving me the chance. I wanted to know if, because Dr. Jim told like that they kind of update about neuromodulation, but I didn't know if they address other than updates about the field, if they address the gaps or any, like they make any predictions that what would happen next or what technologies may develop in future. I'm curious about this. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the question. If by gaps you mean areas of unmet clinical needs where that represent great potential, absolutely. We like to put a lot of attention there. Of course, there's indication areas that are well covered. Chronic pain, chronic back pain is a good example where you have a number of competitors in the neurotech space itself. Without even talking about conventional medical management, pharmaceuticals, et cetera. But we get really excited when we find a technology that emerges for a unmet clinical need. Psychiatric disorders are certainly one example. Yes, there's a whole class of pharmaceuticals out there, but as we all know, there's a significant percentage of the patient population in depression, for instance, in bipolar disorder, and in other indications that's refractory to pharmaceuticals. And this presents a really great opportunity for neuromodulation therapies. Another example is Alzheimer's disease. There's I was moderating a panel at the Bio International meeting in San Diego last month, and there were some great talks about the unmet clinical need there, the cost to society, the cost to caregivers, the emotional toll that it takes, and just the increasing burden that this disorder is going to be placing on our society. And for anyone who's been tracking this space in the pharmaceutical area, there've been a number of clinical trial failures, a lot of money that's been spent by pharmaceutical companies. One drug, Biogen's product that did get FDA approval, but with very shaky data, and CMS made a decision that they're not going to reimburse it. And so the company has really scaled back on their marketing efforts. So there's another example of a gap where there's a gap in terms of the clinical need and the therapeutic options that are available.
It is amazing that you mentioned that. Actually, I have a chat with a congressman that talked that if we don't find a good solution for Alzheimer, cancer and diabetes in the next 10, 15 years, the US would be bankrupt.
Yeah.
With a huge cost. And I know that there are willingness to find a better way to manage this condition. You're right on. So James, I asking a follow-up question here. When we talk about neuromodulation, the one part that is overlooked is the type of waveform, the frequency of waveform, whether we should go low frequency, high frequency, whether we should go this biphasic modulation, or we should go sinusoidal one. I know that there are level of comfort, the type of waveform does matter for level of comfort, but how about the target nerves that we would like to target, whether the type of waveform and the frequency that we are using do matter?
Yeah, I think you've identified, the key challenges and opportunities here in the space, both in neuromodulation and in bioelectronic medicine, whether your target is a nerve, or whether your target is the brain, or whether your target is an end organ. The secret sauce, really, the key, both in terms of the IP and in terms of the therapeutic regimen, is how do we deliver the stimulation? What's the duty cycle? Where do we deliver the stimulation? Do we vary the stimulation? And over the years, just looking at one application, chronic low back pain, for instance, we've seen an emergence of new paradigms, right? So traditionally it was tonic stimulation of the dorsal column. Medtronic did very well. Then some other paradigms have emerged with different targets. Maybe instead of the dorsal column, you're going to stimulate the DRG, the dorsal root ganglia, and a company called Spinal Modulation did very well, sold to St. Jude Medical, which is now part of Abbott. Using that target. Then other companies have emerged with new paradigms. Nevro, phenomenal success using high frequency stimulation, or what they call high frequency stimulation, as opposed to lower frequency stimulation, which produced paresthesia-free pain relief. And then, of course, you've had there's an Australian company called Saluda that said, wait, we want to do closed loop stimulation. Let's look for a biomarker that they call ECAP, the compound action potential, and then use this to modify in a closed loop format the amount of stimulation that they're delivering. And then more recently, Medtronic acquired a company called Stimgenics, that's developed a technology they call differential targeted multiplexed stimulation, where you're not just using one waveform, and not just using one target. So you're going into the spinal cord and stimulating neurons, but also stimulating glial cells. And glial cells play a major role in inflammation and in pain, but the membrane on glial cells have different properties than neural membranes. And so you're going to use a different waveform to target different cells where you're reaching. I think we're going to continue to see advances like this, where you're coming up with novel waveforms, not just for improved efficacy, but also for device life. Maybe if you're more efficient in delivering stimulation, you don't have to replace the battery as much, or if you're using external power, you don't have to recharge as much. So yeah, this is a rich area that's really ripe for commercialization, and also a rich area for collaboration between university research laboratories that develop IP and potential commercial partners who'd like to license it.
Thank you so much, James. So we know that we already passed time, but if it's okay, stay a couple more minutes to answer the questions that we have here. So one question about the safety, and this is for Jeremy. So Jeremy, that's true that even mechanical stimulation, or even low actually amplitude electrical stimulation may consider as to be safe, but there are some discussion that they also casting doubt on the safety. For instance, I remember that when we start to use it for ICU to prevent ICU accurate weakness, then we realized that if it can activate too much muscles, it can burn the oxygen supply in the muscles, and that can lead to muscle atrophy. So therefore, the limitation or duration that we are using, it should be limited, and we need to ensure that we are not burning the oxygen saturation in muscles. So what kind of the other potential risks that we may anticipate for mechanical stimulation for the type of device that you have? And do you think that there should be limitation of duration that we can use and even dose or magnitude of mechanical stimulation?
Right. No, great question. All I can say is in terms of, both at UCLA and Thomas Jefferson, in terms of their IRB and looking at this, designating it as a non-significant risk device, and and then looking at the patients that have used the device, there doesn't seem to be any issues in terms of tolerability. I think someone was talking about chronic long-term use. Certainly, as a novel technology, we don't have long-term data, so that's something certainly we'd want to follow over time. But so far it seems to be both safe and extremely well tolerated.
Okay, thank you so much. And Professor Armstrong, I remember that you designed the very first study on use of electrical stimulation for wound healing, and definitely you're one of the top leaders in designing clinical trial. And that's true that I saw that in your question, you mentioned the idea of the crossovers. Do you want to chime on that questions and maybe open up the discussion?
Oh, sure. I don't know if we have time since we're going over time and there are a bunch of other questions, but sure, I think you can sort of prophylax against people that are saying that, patients aren't going to get offered the active therapy, and you could solve the problem of beneficence by, in at least partially, by crossing everyone over at the end of the study. And I think that offers people the active agent, and it's fun too. It can be really elegant. Number one, we're considering that actually in a study we're doing right now that's still funded by the Department of Defense, where we are using it's super fun. We're using this a GE ultrasound probe, and we are stimulating, believe it or not, the spleen. We should maybe get a talk on this from some of the folks that are doing a lot of work, but we're doing splenic stimulation to upregulate some anti-inflammatory, pro-healing cytokines and chemokines in women and men that have just had burns. And we're randomizing them into active and into sham. But in that study, and again, I could fully understand the issues, the ethical issues that might come up, but we have people in a sham device. They're getting all the very, very best wound care on both ends, but one gets this device and one doesn't. And I think we're okay with that over a lot of years, and thinking that these patients are getting at least good quality care, maybe better, arguably, because of the Hawthorne effect in the control arm. Anyway, I'll be quiet there, but I think this is so fascinating. I mean, there's just so rich. And James, it's really great to meet you. Jeremy, man, good to see you as usual.
Thank you, Professor. I'm sorry, I don't know whether you're using different kind of the AI, but for whatever reason, the matching of the voice and your lips movement didn't match. So I don't know, it was for me or for others as well.
This is a deep fake, man. This is a deep fake.
So James,
it's gotten to podiatry. These deep fakes, it's unbelievable. God, this is the apocalypse, man.
So James, do you have any comments on that one? I know that the crossovers are not always possible, but do you have any suggestion on these?
Yeah, no, David raises a great point, and a lot of neuromodulation companies are in fact using crossover design in their clinical trials. And yes, it does address a lot of the issues, not all of them, but a lot. But one other point I wanted to make about clinical trials, I mentioned earlier that there've been a little bit of movement on the part of the FDA in terms of how that impacts the approval process for devices vis-a-vis drug. Initially in the early days of this industry, you had regulators that were largely coming from the pharmaceutical side, and so their whole idea of designing trials and the approval process had to do with was influenced, was biased by their experience in pharmaceuticals. Well, over the years, we've had a lot of movement, a lot more representation from neural engineering communities at the FDA. Still not enough, but there's more. And so I just want to mention three changes or three relatively new guidances that came from the CDRH, the Centers for Devices and Radiological Health, which is the regulatory body within FDA that approves medical devices. One of them had to do with subpopulations. So let's say you do a clinical trial, you fail to meet your primary endpoint in the population as a whole, but you can identify a subpopulation where you would have met the primary endpoint. Well, you can get approval, and in fact, at least one or two neuromodulation firms have achieved approval despite missing their not meeting their primary endpoints in the pivotal clinical trial because of that guidance. Another area that's helped several device companies has to do with patient preferences. So you're allowed to take into consideration patient preferences with regard to both safety and efficacy. So for instance, in a particular disorder that maybe where there's not a lot of options, maybe the patient community is more risk tolerant than in other areas, and you're allowed to take that into account. And then the third change that we've seen over the years has to do with hypothesis. You're allowed, you weren't previously, and it may well have made a difference, for instance, in the St. Jude Medical Broaden trial, which was a very significant trial of deep brain stimulation to treat depression, to treat treatment-resistant depression. You're allowed now, you weren't back then, but now you're allowed to change your hypothesis in the middle of a trial. So you don't have to stick with something. And that's relevant because there is this dramatic interplay between neuroscience and neurotechnology taking place. And it's really bidirectional. Neural engineers are helping to uncover basic attributes of neuroanatomy and neurophysiology that the basic neuroscientists might not have had absent some of these trials using stimulation, and vice versa. Neuroscientists are developing new theories and new models of brain and nervous system function that will help device companies and neural engineering researchers modify and identify the mechanism of action. So we're seeing this constant evolution in our knowledge and our understanding and our modeling of why these therapies work, and that can make a big difference if you can build a model, build a hypothesis that explains to a regulator why this therapeutic approach is working, and then you learn something more in the course of that trial. We can modify that, and that also helps you. So those are three changes we've seen at CDRH.
Amazing. That's very promising. Of course, we have a great neuroengineers that design even electronic tattoo for delivering mechanical and electrical stimulation. Dr. Gottrof, that he has a question, but unfortunately he needed to leave, but we'll connect you. But the last question for John Paul. John Paul, you are very patient. Thank you so much for waiting. Please go ahead and ask your question. John Paul, you are mute.
Hi, Bijan. I first would like to say I really appreciate your reflection on this relationship between the vascular and neural systems and how we can use these sorts of technologies. I work in post-senescent cells, so I work in CNS most of the time, but there are these radial guides along which the vascular networks grow. So I think it's really important. And in many cases, sometimes the trophic molecules that work on the vascular system are also neurotrophic. So I find this all really fascinating. So I'll now ask my question. So I work in the eye, and there's this rage right now, photobiomodulation. And I'm just wondering what's crossing your desk, what you see through your publications, because we're at the point right now with a stimulatory device that we can target through some spatial and temporal modulation of our stimulus specific transmitter systems. So if we want to target dopaminergic amacrine cells, we can do that. What do you see anything on the horizon? I'm just wondering, you're probably 2-3 steps ahead of me, but as a therapeutic device, let's say, are you seeing those sorts of things through your interactions?
We have seen a number of commercial efforts, or at least a small number of commercial efforts in photobiomodulation. One promising approach, interestingly enough, I mentioned Alzheimer's disease. There's a company called Cavuoto Therapeutics that achieved FDA breakthrough device designation for their photobiomodulation approach to treating Alzheimer's. There have been a number of other companies, smaller firms, using either a laser treatment or an LED treatment for chronic pain or for related disorders. But yeah, I probably in my introduction should have spent more time talking about the different modalities. Obviously, the field of neuromodulation was birthed by electrical stimulation approaches, but over the years we've seen advances in purely magnetic stimulation, particularly with psychiatric applications. With optical stimulation, there's a whole other area called optogenetics, which involves really the merger of light stimulation combined with genetic engineering techniques to actually modify cells and make them into receptors, even if they weren't receptors to begin with. Make new cells or receptors to light, and this is a promising area, although it's probably a bit downstream for commercial applications. But yeah, the combination of optogenetics and more traditional optical stimulation or photo biomodulation definitely addresses a lot of the challenges that have been presented by electrical stimulation, including unwanted stimulation. Can you be more precise? Can you be more specific in the cells that you're targeting with optical as opposed to electrical? And clearly there's a lot of indications that yes, yes, you can. So definitely we're beginning to see more commercial activity there, but clearly it's an area that's wide open for opportunity.
Thank you so much, James and Jeremy. I really appreciate that generously you allocating your time. Amazing talk. It's really inspiring. I'm seeing great synergy between C2SHiP and actually what you're doing. We're hoping to have a more engagement with you, and Jeremy is amazing technology. Best of luck for the direction, and definitely we'd be happy to see that how we can support bringing your technology to the market, because this is, as you mentioned, is a huge unmet need to manage pain and headache and migraine. Thank you all. Happy Friday. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.